The Capital, as a show that advocates for youth development and youth leadership across the entrepreneurial space, is here today to come and inform us more on the role in which government is currently playing towards the investment grid that we have in Botswana. My name is Kuleko Trafetsi. Welcome to The Capital. As we continue with the dynamics of the broader investment grid, talking about economics and so forth, I'm joined here today by the Chief Negotiator from the Ministry of Investment, Trade and Industry, Mr. Paja Butali. Mr. Butali, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
If we can just get right straight into it, Botswana is the 51st country to sign what you call the African Continent Free Trade Agreement. This is in February 2019, paving way for other African countries to also join into this new establishment, so to say. Can you just probably give us a brief on what this framework is about and what this agreement is about?
Yeah, this agreement is about liberalizing trade, both trade in goods and trade in services on the African continent. This is the brainchild of heads of state of the African Union. They came together and asked, why is Africa not trading with Africa? Because previous studies showed that only between 1 to 2% of trade was between and amongst African states. But as of 2019, it has shown that it's grown to about 15%. Now, the leaders asked, how do we grow trade on the African continent? And one vehicle towards growing intra-Africa trade is the AfCFTA, which is a free trade agreement, which seeks to remove tariffs for trade on the continent and to remove non-tariff barriers on the continent.
Okay, so now I would just want to just commemorate this and just bring it a bit back home. We've seen the pandemic of COVID-19 earlier last year, starting to hit more of African countries. And we've seen economies now shutting down because of the lockdown, and then we've seen total output in terms of GDP contracting within Africa as a whole. How do we then see the African Continent Free Trade Area sort of liberalizing this and sort of, bringing back the effects that were brought about by COVID-19?
Even before COVID-19, this agreement was meant to transform the economies of African countries and to grow trade on the continent and to circulate the raw materials in the continent to be value added in the continent, thus developing industry on the African continent. Now came the COVID pandemic. It just blew everything upside down. The whole global economy is in a shambles now, because even more than the medical or health effect, I think the economic effect has been debilitating, not only on African economies, because throughout the global economy, only the Chinese economy has shown positive growth over the last 12 months. However, not all is lost, and with the gradual reopening of the global economy, the AfCFTA still retains its importance towards transforming African economies and indeed growing the economic landscape on the African continent.
Well, given Joe Biden's win the past year, don't you think as well we're about to see the US and other Western countries, being at the forefront as well to be able to compete with China as well? No, just a thought.
It depends on the trade policy that they're bringing. Are they going to change 360 degrees from the previous administration, or are they going to keep to the same trajectory? But we hope that the US will move towards improving multilateral trade relations first at the WTO, and hopefully by taking a back seat on the global trade wars we have been seeing over the past few years, so that the global economy can go back towards growing the multilateral system.
Do you probably foresee maybe now this new administration that we're mentioning of probably investing more into Africa?
I very much doubt, because the Democrats, that's Joe Biden, they've been there before. And they did assist Africa, but there hasn't been a marked difference when the Democrats are in power and when the Republicans are in power. It remains for Africa to help Africa, and the AfCFTA was one step towards going towards Africa, helping Africa grow its economy.
Okay. I like that you're sort of bringing out a political perspective towards this. Now, I'm interested to know, within the African context as a whole, how then do we then see these different member states now committing towards this same goal that are working towards? Is it just going to be one country that's putting in one foot forward, or are we all on the same page? How do we ensure commitment?
No, we are all on the same page, because like you mentioned when we started, Botswana was the 51st to sign the agreement. I think now 54 out of 55 African states have signed on to the agreement, and about 30 have ratified. We have agreed the rules of engagement ahead of time, beforehand, to say this is what's going to happen in terms of reducing the tariffs, this is what's going to happen on rules of origin. So the political will is there, and we take everybody's word and signature to the agreement to mean that even on implementation, they will implement as agreed.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I have Botswana's Chief Negotiator in the Ministry of Investment, Trade and Industry, Mr. Paja Butali. Stay tuned as we discuss more on the African Continental Free Trade Arrangement. Welcome back to the capital. As we still continue with this discussion over here, I'm really interested to know, since you are Botswana's chief negotiator within this whole agreement, what were some of the outstanding divergent views towards its implementation, its stimulation, and the thought process towards how it's going to go about? What disadvantage could this also have towards Botswana's economy?
Yeah, from the beginning there were divergent views. You can imagine if you have 15 competing interests in the same room. Just agreeing the rules of engagement was a problem. But the real points of divergence, as I've seen hitherto, come where we are now supposed to agree on rules of origin. Rules of origin are rules that determine whether a product produced in Botswana can be said to be a Botswana product for it to benefit under the preferential tariff regime of the AfCFTA. And you find that there are some products where there is huge differences. For example, in auto manufacturing and textiles and sugar, these industries or sectors are historically very contentious, because you have the sugar producers on the one side and the non-producers, the consumers like Botswana, on the other side, where we would want simpler and more flexible rules, but the producers want stringent so as to cushion them against competition coming from outside the African continent. So you can imagine, but we do try so that at the end of the day, even though not everybody will be happy, but everybody will be able to live with what has been agreed.
Has been agreed so far. I'm interested to know, from a realistic perspective, we started signing this agreement in February 2019, and I understand that the whole ideology is to remove up to 90% of tariffs by the year 2022. How realistic is this that the African countries on their own will be able to meet such targets?
It's realistic, but it's going to be a Herculean exercise, because some of the economies, they differ. The level of development differs across the continent. For example, for us in SACU, we don't have a problem removing tariffs, because we have done that already in the SADC protocol on trade. But you find some least developed countries and other regional configurations rely a great deal on finances coming from customs duties and the like to fund their national budget. So to allay their fears, you find that if we as Botswana, as part of SACU, are ready to move immediately, one least developed country will be given a period of 10 years to phase down the removal of tariffs until they are ready to say now we can go on zero tariffs.
The same point, how are we yet to protect the juvenile economies against probably other countries that probably have an upper hand towards benefiting more out of this agreement?
Yes, the agreement itself has inbuilt mechanisms to prevent the bigger economies from outcompeting and crushing the smaller economies. Yes. We have infant industry protection, we have what is called trade remedies, so that if, as Botswana, we realize that all of a sudden, because of the advent of the AfCFTA, there's a sudden influx of goods that threaten our infant industry, then we can put in place what's called safeguard duties, so that we make our domestic product competitive as against that which is coming outside the country.
Yes, I'm probably interested as well to know, in terms of infrastructure, would it not be a prohibitory factor, particularly for Botswana, because we're right next to South Africa, for example, but the level of, for example, our roads is probably a little lesser standard compared to what we're seeing across board. Trade is part of what you expect out of such an agreement. So obviously, movement of goods from country A to country B plays in as a factor. And don't you think that may pose as a threat for countries like Botswana with lesser infrastructure facilities and so forth?
No, in fact, for us, we are piggybacking on the infrastructure that's in South Africa and Namibia in terms of the ports of entry. However, the heads of state, in their wisdom, they made 3 pillars to the AfCFTA. You have the market integration, which talks about removal of tariffs and non-tariff barriers. Then you have the industrial development pillar, which talks to how are you going to capacitate and grow your industry to be able to produce goods of a quality and quantity that will be able to compete on the continent. And then lastly, the point you are mentioning, the infrastructure development pillar. How are you going to move goods across Africa, for example, in the DRC or Angola? There's civil strife. But speaking for Botswana, I think over the years, infrastructure development is a process. It's not an event. And over the years, we have cooperated with Namibia for the Trans-Kalahari Highway. We have cooperated with Zambia for the Kazungula Bridge. All these were brought into being in view of the fact that we look forward to trading with Africa, because where Botswana is geographically positioned is advantageous, because we are right in the middle of Southern Africa, and we see Botswana as a conduit towards going up the continent in Africa.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we're making and creating precedents towards the discussion around the African continent free trade area, it's up to us as Botswana to start having a closer look into how we can probably do trade with other African countries and how we can probably improve in manufacturing within our country, given the high importation bill. We continue the discussion after the break as we try to then deliberate more around this. Looking forward. Mr. Butali, for the past 3, 4, 5 years, we've seen most of the parastatals today trying to advocate more on foreign direct investment, particularly your Botswana Investment and Trade Center, the Special Economic Zones Authority. I know that they're looking into FDI as a whole, but how prudent and how effective is it for us to still be advocating for this when we now have this agreement in place? And then how do we still ensure active citizen participation?
When you talk investment promotion for Botswana government, you are talking Botswana Investment and Trade Center and the Special Economic Zones Authority. Yes. Now, both these entities are targeting investment from anywhere, be it local investment or foreign direct investment. So looking at the AfCFTA, when you talk the industrial development pillar, we are looking to bring in technical expertise and indeed capital, because some of these manufacturing enterprises are capital intensive to start. So what we could emphasize is linkages between foreign investors and the local citizen component. And going forward, we are coming up with a citizen economic empowerment law, which hopefully will speak to that, so that even if we bring in foreign investors with the necessary technical capacity and indeed the financial muscle, they are tied to local citizen companies, which will in turn lead to technology transfer and indeed growth in business acumen.
Okay, so I think one area that we probably just usually turn a blind eye to, or usually just neglect, so to say, is the informal sector. So I'm interested to know what this multilateral trading system now is going to bring in towards, give a helping hand towards the informal sector as a whole. I know, for example, what we've done in Botswana, we've had the Citizen Entrepreneur Development Agency, CEDA, now speaking more towards what the informal sector could do. But I'm also trying to link this now to this new agreement and how we can probably all benefit as a whole.
The informal sector could piggyback on the bigger industry. But of particular interest to the AfCFTA is the informal sector operating around borders. For example, in Mamuno, in Ramatlabama for Botswana, for the context of Botswana, and in Kazungula. Yes. Now, what the AfCFTA does is to say, let's ease the requirements for the free movement of business persons living along border areas, so that you make it easier for a lady in Kasane to do trade in Livingstone, or one in Mamuno to do trade in Khobabis in Namibia. But cross-border trade is very expensive and it's very complex, such that it's for the big boys to play in, but the SMMEs can come in, because like we're saying, we're living in a global world now, where you need this interveners, I don't want to say middlemen, who can be the small guys. You identify a niche market in Rwanda, maybe for Botesh salt. You will be the link between Botesh and some buyer in Rwanda. So, which is why I'm saying the small and micro enterprises can piggyback on big industry and benefit from the big market of the AfCFTA.
I'm probably just interested to know as well, we have other trade agreements that are currently in place. We have the SADC protocols, we have the EU, we have the AGOA and so forth. How can we probably as Botswana try to, liberate more out of this and just take advantage of these?
Yeah, it's in the same way as with the AfCFTA, but now you are talking faraway markets. And the restrictions become even more stringent. Whether you talk about technical standards or you talk about standards for plants and animals. Now it's easier for the small men to play within the context of the AfCFTA than it is to play within the context of the European Union, which basically we were benefiting through BMC. And you can see how big a company BMC is. They're able to slaughter cattle and send to the EU market, and indeed to meet the standards required in the EU market.
Okay, probably just in conclusion, our manufacturing bill stands at around 40 billion annually, and this comes off in very, very different industries within the manufacturing component, so to say. What words of encouragement would you probably try to give out to a fellow viewer who's probably watching? What areas could they probably start looking into? What next steps should we start taking as Botswana?
I think the first step is to do research, market research, and to seek assistance, whether it's from this ministry or from BITC or CESA. Because knowledge, like they say, is power. Then you see what is needed. Previously, why Botswana has not been producing a lot is because of the size of the market. We are only a population of plus 2 million plus minus, give or take a few thousand. But with the AfCFTA now opening the market, you are talking about 1.4 billion people. Now it's for young guys like you to be creative and see, do you now use the AfCFTA as currency to partner with investors with the necessary muscle to say no. Instead of having the 2 million market, now we have the over 1 billion population market of Africa to explore.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it first. Mr. Pajaputale from the Ministry of Investment, Trade and Industry deliberating more on the African Continent Free Trade Agreement. There's now the position for us to start looking into what we can probably take advantage of, what opportunities lie in for us, particularly the informal sector and the youth, both within Botswana and across the African continent as a whole. My name is Kilego Tlhafetse. This was The Capital. Thank you for viewing.